So we're gathered here today to celebrate the life of your friend and my brother Arnab Kumar Chando. My name is Arundhati Parmar, but most of you in the audience know me as Bibi. Arnab loved a captive audience, and I don't think we could have done any better than this December afternoon. The story of Arnab's life begins early in the morning on October 28, 1973, in Kolkata, India. Baba, my father, worked in the Shipping Corporation of India, so it was only appropriate that he be named Arnab, which means ocean. Word has it that as a baby he was as calm as the Pacific. My maternal grandmother declared he was a cherub. But there was no disputing one fact. He was one chubby baby, which earned him the rather unfortunate Bengali nickname of Gablu or Gabla. Actually, my mom made it more palatable by calling it Gabla. I'm not sure it makes a huge difference. But the reality is that the moment he left India, he kept that fact very well hidden. I'd bet there are a few people in the audience who didn't even know he had that wonderful nickname. The attention that Arnab had garnered over 3 solid years was suddenly at stake with the arrival of a little sister in October 1976. And Arnab demonstrated his displeasure in a very peculiar way. He began peeing on a carom board, which is a very popular board game in India, kind of pool, but in a different way. My mom was very upset. She would beg him to stop, to no avail. 3 strikes later, and my mom stuck him in the bathroom shower that he was mortally afraid of. The peeing stopped, and the resentment melted away, and it was the beginning of a bond that extended the entirety of his life. Arnab made it to all the milestones in my life, be it my kids' rice-eating ceremony, playing with my son, or my own wedding. He never had any filter, as all of you know. We would discuss everything from hot chicks to women to his friends' escapades to politics. There was never anything left unsaid. In fact, we had discussed this memorial and where he wanted it to happen. He was my lifelong friend. But I wasn't his first. That credit belongs to Arijit Chaudhary, the boy in the yellow shorts in this picture. Arijit was Arnab's preschool friend in Montessori. And in this picture, it's Arijit's birthday, and he has selected Arnab to put a garland around his neck. Arijit really tried hard to get a visa, but unfortunately, the current visa officials denied him one. But he has lent us his voice, and I will play an audio that he prepared for this occasion.
Good morning to all. The voice that you hear for the next 5 minutes is of a childhood friend of Arnab, who idolized him as a friend and an elder brother. My name is Arijit, and I live in Mumbai in India. And I tried my level best to be there in person for this special day, but couldn't make it. So here I am, in an audio file sharing my heart. I knew Arnab for over 40 years. And if I divide this 40 years in 2 halves of 20 years each, I will share about the first 20 years, which many of you out there want to know about. So just close your eyes and listen to the beautiful story of Arnab. Arnab and I went to the same preschool and then to the same primary and secondary school for 15 years. And in those lovely years, there were times when we were inseparable. In fact, our families were inseparable. My parents used to consider Arnab like their son. And even I enjoyed the same status with his parents. More than being the best friend, he was my guardian in school. And when I fractured my leg while playing soccer, he used to visit my home every alternate day to check on how I am and to let me know what was taught in school, though I was happy bunking my school on medical grounds. This was my Arnab, responsible and caring at the same time. A few years passed, and the family returned to India after a brief stint in Bangladesh. And here was cool dude Arnab, with his trademark Travolta type walking style, which made sure that his lock of hair bounced as he walked, and he could confirm the same from the shadow on the ground. And these were the years when his dream of America was sown. A few years down the road, there was Arnab again, with an unheard result in engineering entrance test in India. And for people who are aware of the hyper competition in India, he stood, if I remember right, 34th out of 400,000 students who appeared for that exam. And to our surprise, he shunned Indian Institute of Technology and walked into Stanford University Graduate School to do his majors in physics. And in his casual manner, completed double majors in physics and chemistry. And when everyone was in a race to do their MBA, once again he casually shared that he would get the job of an MBA without an MBA degree. And so was the case, as he joined Lehman Brothers. So here is a guy who studied world history when he was 8 years old, walked like Travolta when he was 13, tried to sing lustily like Michael Jackson when he was 16, though this was an area which badly needed improvement, exuded cool quotient of the highest order, and a brilliant mind with out-of-the-world grades by the time he was 20. Though he was my best friend, but I idolized him all my life. And he happily mentored me. And destiny was such that my lovely wife, whom I dated from the first year in college, shares her birthday with Arnab on October 28th. And when I was expecting my twin sons, I knew I will name one of them as Arnab. So I just made sure that Arnab lives with me every moment of my life, and I will go on celebrating his special day every year on October 28th. And finally, to his parents, whom I refer to as Mashi and Mesho. Life will never be the same, as each passing day will be a tug of war of the glorious past and the painful present. Time will fight its eternal battle to ease the pain, and I pray to Almighty to help you to overcome the pain. And remember that your younger son lives in India and is a phone call away. Wherever you are, I will always love you, Arnab, like a brother. Love you, dear.
Arijit referred to the fact that we went to Bangladesh in 1984. And continuing on our Catholic educational path, my parents admitted us to the St. Francis Xavier's Greenherald International School. The school was pivotal in Arnab's life in sparking the desire to come to America. But the Eddie Murphy story has got to wait. At his first co-ed school, Arnab discovered women, and oh, that he had super smooth hair. If you look at this picture, you can see the big 80s hair. He's here in this picture with our driver, Nuru. Back then, all good little Bengali boys would put a ton of hair oil in their hair before their bath, lovingly slathered on by their moms. My mother, Ma, did not put on a ton, but she wasn't exactly immune to the ritual either. This cramped Arnab's style. He would wake up, without telling her anything, he would wake up at 6 a.m., shampoo and shower, put on his school uniform, and then bike in our front yard so the cool morning air would act as a natural hairdryer, all to impress the ladies. Mom figured it out, had a conversation with my brother, and then the hair oil was put to rest forever. But the craziness at Greenherald doesn't stop there. And to tell you more, I have to welcome to the stage Rajarshi Gupta, who has been witness to the majority of the ups and downs in Arnab's life. Rajarshi.
I met Arnab when I was 10 years old. And it has been a privilege for me to be a friend with him for all these years of my life. My mother still calls him Boro Chele, or older son. My very first impression was of an extremely self-assured yet helpful boy. Not only did he advise me profusely on our very first meeting on how to prepare for the admission test to his school, he even lectured my dad on how to prepare for the interview with the headmistress. With his help, I was indeed admitted to the Greenherald International School. His helpful yet inquisitive attitude found a worthy cause during 7th grade. Some pranksters had found a rather unique prank to play. So they would loosen the cap of the water bottle, which was typically in the book bag, causing the bottle to tip over and the water to make the books wet. So Arnab jumped into action, and with a group of like-minded friends, set up a famous 5-style sleuthing agency. They would hide behind cupboards, rush back from lunch break, and even skip library period in an attempt to catch the perpetrators. Result, many of the teachers found this activity very suspicious, and our principal, Sister Imelda, became quite convinced that Arnab was in fact the ringleader of the original liquid pranks. Thankfully, the pranks stopped on their own, and no one was the wiser. Pranks apart, Arnab was an absolutely brilliant student. During our time in high school, many of us spent much of 11th and 12th grades studying for the entrance examination to the IITs. Arnab did the same and had an extremely high rank to the entrance exam. He also did very, very well in his school leaving examinations, topping his state. And I forget to mention that neither of these two activities was the core importance or the highlight of his time during those 2 years. He was in fact studying hard to apply to a number of elite US schools that led to his winning a full scholarship to Stanford. While Arnab excelled in academics, both in school and at Stanford, his academic prowess, unfortunately, did not extend to the vaunted halls of the DMV. After graduating from Stanford, he started working at Robertson Stephens. He used to live on California Avenue in San Francisco and didn't own a car. So I came to Berkeley in '97 for my PhD, and he was taking driving lessons at the time. So he wanted me to drive him to the DMV in San Francisco to take the driving test, which I did, and he failed. No matter, a few weeks later, we tried this again, this time in DMV Berkeley, and he failed again. And once more at DMV Oakland. And a fourth time at some other DMV in the Bay Area. I'm not making this up. So by now, in the meantime, several months had passed. He had bought a very nice BMW and was in fact driving around the whole area illegally with only a learner's permit. He was also getting quite convinced that the DMV testers were out to get him and had relayed this information to every DMV in the area. So finally, he managed to learn from somewhere that the DMV in San Jose was quite lenient, and he convinced me to drive him all the way from Berkeley to San Jose to take the driving test, which he finally passed in his 5th attempt. So to this date, I bear responsibility for all the traffic hazards created on the streets of California. Note that his helpful attitude remained quite undiminished even after this experience. A few years later, when I got married and my wife Anindita moved to the United States, Arnab was quite ready for her with a wide array of DMV test questions, ratings about DMV locations, and general advice about how to take the driving test. So I probably should have seen this coming, but Anindita listened to Arnab and promptly went on to fail the test. My years at Berkeley, while Arnab lived in San Francisco, were filled with a very, very close group of friends, many of whom are here today. We watched soccer together. We went on memorable vacations together. And we had these crazy adventures, with Arnab invariably taking center stage on every crazy bad venture or mad venture. You know, I never met the world's most interesting man, but Arnab was the most interesting friend I knew. We often tell stories about his life, and when we do, they're quite true and absolutely amazing. I'm sure he's behaving very similarly now up there in heaven. Stay forever interesting, my friend.
I can tell you for a fact that he was waiting eagerly for the driverless car far before anyone else, anyone did. So Arnab had a close connection to my maternal grandfather, who used to be the head of humanities at one of the IITs in India. Arnab inherited his curious mind. I remember a time when my grandparents were visiting us, and my grandfather picked up a book about Kim Philby that Arnab had read. Kim Philby was the notorious double agent for the United Kingdom and the then USSR. In that book, there were several references to 007. My curious grandfather pestered Arnab about who is James Bond. Promptly, Arnab picked out a movie, James Bond movie. I forget which it was, but I would have thought twice, given the content of typical James Bond movies, to show it to my grandfather, but not Arnab. So he played it. My grandfather watched it. Let's just say he wasn't impressed, but he was happy that he had learned something new from Arnab. In deciding to come to the US, as you heard from Rajarshi, Arnab only applied to the top schools. He was a bit sad that Stanford did not waive the application fee. I think it was about $65 or so at the time. And he went and talked to my father, and my father said, "You should go ahead and apply anyway." He was delighted to be admitted. But there was a roadblock. At the time, the second of the 3 yearly exams were taking place at his high school, St. James. In his immense generosity, Arnab allowed a desperate classmate to copy his physics answers and got caught. The teachers gave him a 0 on the final report card, but the real problem was Stanford required that transcript. My mother was called to a meeting with the school principal, and while berating Arnab for this incident, she rhetorically asked him, "Well, what are you going to do now about Stanford?" It's not exactly every day that a high school student gets an all tuition paid ride to Stanford. So the principal really quickly added, "We'll take care of that." If you look closely at this report card from that year, there's a 00 and an AB standing for absent in that report card. That's how we duped Stanford into taking Arnab. This is not going over the internet, so that school will not know. Well, it will. Anyway. The first friend we heard of was David. He was and is the smartest guy that Arnab ever met. And they developed an enduring relationship which expanded to engulf the entire Chando family. David is my mother's other son and has been so for years. Come up here, David.
I still can't believe that that Arnab is no longer here. I met Arnab during orientation week here at Stanford. We lived one door down from each other at Flomo, right around the corner. We started talking. One night, there was an event where all of the different ethnic minority groups at Stanford were introducing themselves. We met there, we started talking, and we both love to argue. And you know this about Arnab. What some of you may not know, that when Arnab got here, he was a staunch Marxist, a Trotskyite, and at that point I was a libertarian. And we argued all the way back to the dorm. We argued almost straight through the night. And we argued ever since, all the years. You know, he moved much more to the right. I moved to the left. But I still remember the argument from that night. The way you remember something new that comes into your life and takes a hold of it. Arnab was always larger than life. I think very few people who met him ever forgot him. He just had this inexhaustible life energy. And he confronted all the obstacles, all of the social niceties that are supposed to put you into your place. And he just confronted them, testing, arguing, joking, fighting, and it was like he was living his own epic. And I want to tell you a few Stanford stories. When we got here, there was a kid who was also going to be a chemistry major, like Arnab. And Arnab wanted to be both a physics and chemistry major. And this kid was very, very condescending towards Arnab. And, you know, treated him like somebody fresh off the boat. And basically advised him on what he needed to do to survive academically at Stanford, etc. And it ended up that he was the one who was actually weeded out through the introductory chemistry classes. And the spring quarter came along, and Arnab asked him what he was planning to study, what classes he was taking. And the guy said, well, you know, I'm going to take some painting classes this quarter, and basically intimating that he was still much cooler than Arnab ever would be. And so Arnab, from that point on, called him the painter. And so all of his close friends and everybody also called him the painter. Another episode like this, when Arnab got here, we were in the heyday of political correctness at Stanford. And you know, Arnab was never a very politically correct kind of guy. And so I remember I was sitting at an adjacent table, and I'd gotten there later, and he was eating with a bunch of Stanford ladies in our dorm. And he started talking about saying, you know, the girls at Stanford, and so he was chewed out because he was supposed to say women and not girls. So he heard a very, very long lecture from all of these people, and very prominent amongst them were these two Jewish women who were kind of the enforcers in our dorm of this kind of political correctness. And you know, in those days, there was no, you didn't go look up your classes on the internet. Stanford published a big book that had all of the courses, you know, across all of the programs. And Arnab and I loved to sit down and read through and, you know, think about the classes we were interested in, or classes with super obscure, you know, titles like the post-hermeneutic position in French criticism since 1970. And so he found this course called The Women in Jewish Modernity. So this became his name for these these two Stanford women, and so we all called them the women in Jewish modernity. one other Stanford Jewish story. So, we were living in the dorms, and when you lived in the dorms, you had to be part of food service, which was horrendous and super expensive. And Arnab figured out that the only way to get out was to join the Stanford Kosher Co-op. So he came to me and he said, you're Jewish, let's go together, and I'll say, I'm there for religious dietary reasons. And so we went there, and the manager at that time was desperate to have more people because there weren't that many Jewish kids who actually wanted to keep kosher at the time at Stanford. So there were a few people who were claiming religious dietary reasons for being at the kosher co-op, and I went along because I also wanted to get out of food service. So it started that way, and then it ended up that more and more people got wind of this, and so this whole dorm close to the kosher co-op opted out and joined the kosher co-op, claiming religious dietary reasons. So then food service got a wind of this, and so the next year they said, okay, you have to get a letter from a rabbi. if you want. So the rabbi at Hillel was nice enough to say, anybody who comes to me and says that they want to join the kosher co-op for religious dietary reasons, it's fine with me. I will write a letter for them. So Arnab went to the rabbi and said, I need to join the co-op because I'm a strict vegetarian Hindu, which he was not, as most of you know. And so he came back to the co-op. And then a month later, the rabbi was visiting the co-op for Shabbat dinner. And Arnab had completely forgotten the conversation that he had with him. And there he was, chowing down on chicken right in front of the rabbi. I have a lot of stories. What I remember about Arnab most at Stanford was just what a smart guy he was. I remember this one time he was taking a class in physical chemistry that I know all the people in chemistry were saying was one of the hardest that in the major. And because of the honor code at Stanford, you don't have to stay for the exam. You can just take the exam and go home. And Arnab always did this. He always took the exam and went back to the dorm room. And so I remember he came back home. He was just chatting with me, having a conversation, and over an hour, he just filled out the exam. And he turned it back in. And it was by far the highest grade of anybody in the class. And it was just so easy for him. He read voraciously. I would read very, very slowly. He would finish a whole book of 200 pages in 2 hours, and he'd have perfect memory of most of it. I think if he'd wanted to, he would have been a brilliant physicist. That's what he'd come to Stanford actually to do. But then, as he would say, he didn't want to continue with the Bengali paradigm. And so he decided essentially to forge his own path. We remained best friends, in and out of each other's lives, day in and day out, for many years. And as best friends, we also had our ups and downs. What always amazed me about Arnab was that he never got down. Whatever was happening, whatever problems, he was always testing, arguing, joking, and sometimes, I'll be completely honest, his energy was even too much for me. I understood him a lot better once I went to his wedding in India, in Kolkata. And I saw in Kolkata all of the people vying with each other, arguing, all of the clamor, and I realized how much energy you needed to achieve everything that he achieved in his life. Arnab actually changed a lot, I think, after his wedding. To me, he had remained a kind of eternal son through all of the years. And then, he met somebody that I think for the first time he started caring about somebody else, taking care of somebody else. And he grew a lot, he matured. He calmed down a little bit, he relaxed, he wasn't testing people as much as he had done in the past. He joined NVIDIA, a job that he absolutely loved, people that he really loved, and people that, having been with him over the past few years, people that show that when we imagine that institutions can't behave in a decent and human way, they did, to the end of his life. The thing that disappoints me the most as his friend is that the person who was so close to finding happiness, essentially, in these last few years, that a person who'd never really lived life in a tragic way at all, in so many ways, did not get to fulfill that happiness, and that some of the great person that I think I had always admired him, but the great person that I saw him becoming, that some of that was disappointed. The hardest thing for me, I visited him. I live in Europe, but I visited him a couple of times and spent a few weeks with him in the last few months. And every time friends would visit, he would perk up and he would become his old self, essentially. But the hardest thing for me was seeing him go quiet for long stretches of time. Just struggling to be himself, just struggling to hold on to that life that he was so full of for so long. But, even in the last few months, I felt that with all that he was suffering, he still grew as a human being. He focused, every time I had a conversation with him, he focused on what he needed to do for the people that were going to be left behind, the people that he loved, so that they would be okay and everything would be fine. And he really did not focus on himself in any way. And as Red Joshi was saying, I think the world lost one of its most interesting people, and I lost my best friend.
Thank you, David. On a slightly lighter note, I think David was the one who realized what it is to have Arnab as a pseudo mother-in-law. No girlfriend ever measured up. In fact, he actively would say pretty bad things behind their back. The last one, though, he liked a lot, so David, think about that. Dan makes up the third member of the Arnab, David, and Dan trio. That was the Stanford crew. I first heard of Dan described in this way. This guy uses SAT words in conversational English. That's what I remembered. So David, Dan, and Arnab called each other big guy. So here's the big guy.
So I'm going to try to keep this a lighter tone, as Bibi mentioned. But Arnab was truly one of my closest friends over the last 23 plus years, dating to the very first day at Stanford when we met in the dorm. And I was always impressed because he did know the SAT words that I tried to use. And we shared a love of geography, of politics, of learning in general. And I think what I would summarize Arnab's very unique personality with was he was always open to experimentation and exploration. And that took many forms over many years. In the earliest days at Stanford, he toyed with the idea of whether he should change his name to be more easy to pronounce for many of the pronunciation-challenged Stanford students, myself included. So he toyed with Arnold and Arno at one point. He insisted on the proper pronunciation of his name. And yet he grew into becoming very comfortable with his name. And of course, as everyone knows, did not change his name. But he went through a very sort of reflective period of who he was. And as David mentioned earlier, he evolved in a significant way over the years, but he kept the core aspects of his personality. He was willing to try new things at all times. At Stanford, that included me convincing him to try out a college football game, to even attend an occasional fraternity party. Do you remember, David? We experimented with trying to pick up girls at fraternity parties. Neither of us had much success, as you can imagine, although we did have a memorable evening when he had some success with a blonde rugby player who we joked about 20 years later. Arnab was really unique in the way he could engage with different types of people. And I think, everyone in this audience is testament to that. He could really have a very engaging conversation with folks from all different walks of life, all different age groups. He would spend hours talking with my father about tech company stocks and tech trends. Having learned a lot from Dan Niles. He could easily switch gears and talk art history and art trends with my brother-in-law, who's an artist. He could then talk to my sister about online marketing and the retail industry, all in the span of 30 or 45 minutes. He could connect with investment bankers. He could discuss quantum physics with a Stanford professor, discuss policy changes with an Obama campaign manager, and then head off to tutor underprivileged youth in mathematics. He was truly a unique guy. He was part of our family, and we hosted him for Thanksgiving, weddings, and other family events over many years. The thing that struck me the most is he came to our wedding in Chile in 1998 at a time when he was very early in his career in investment banking, and it was a very significant sacrifice to take 2 weeks off from his very demanding job and travel 6,000 miles away to come. The thing that impressed me the most about that trip was shortly after our wedding, he said he was headed to Easter Island, which is the world's most remote island, and in 1998 was even more remote. Said he was headed there for 6 days by himself, not speaking a word of Spanish, to live with a Polynesian family. And my wife, who's Chilean, sort of was, very concerned that he was going to somehow either get abducted or catch some sort of illness. And she almost convinced my mother-in-law to prevent him from traveling. Of course, he ended off pulling the trip off without a hitch and had a wonderful time and very cool photos to show. He was a true one-of-a-kind guy who I didn't fully experience all the facets of his different personality until the wedding in Calcutta, as David mentioned. He made an impact on people from all different phases of his life, and he had friends and family and friends of family come to that event and share in his life. And he truly knew that he was surrounded by loved ones. And even though we go through a difficult moment, and we have gone through difficult moments, and his family has gone through difficult moments over these past months, he knew that he was surrounded by love. He knew he was surrounded by his cherished family. He was the eternal son. He had the love and support of his parents, who made an enormous sacrifice to move here, and his sister and brother-in-law and their family, who made an enormous sacrifice to move from Minneapolis. And deep down inside, I think, he really was reflective of that. He appreciated that, even in the most difficult moments. There was at least some serenity to knowing that he had impacted people and had deep love around him. And I think it's fitting that we share in his life today at Stanford, because this was truly a special place for him. It made a really deep impact on his life. It was his intellectual home. It was his emotional home. When he lived in Los Angeles, I remember he would oftentimes schedule business meetings and travel around, an opportunity to spend even an hour or two on campus here, oftentimes at the Stanford bookstore, where he could curl up and, in only Arnab fashion, curl up with a chemistry textbook or a book on, a critique of current politics in the U.S. And just, he loved being here on campus. And we're deeply grateful to Bechtel, to everyone here who's made this day possible. And as a big guy, as Bibi mentioned, we always felt a strong bond that only friends over many decades who've shared all the different ups and downs of life can have, and I'll always cherish those memories. So thank you.
Stanford gave him many things, as you just heard, including chickenpox, which he managed to actually avoid in the third world when he was under my mother's care. Our paternal cousin, whom we call Didi, which means older sister in Bengali, was then in Mexico with a newborn. She didn't hesitate to invite Arnab over to take care of him. Some of you met Didi at the funeral a few weeks ago. Cousins from our maternal side also featured prominently. Didi was from my father's side of the family. And I dug up this photo in 2007. This was celebrating our maternal grandmother's memory. And all of the cousins and all of the uncles and aunts are in this picture. Having graduated from Stanford in 1996, Arnab decided to forego academics, much to the chagrin of my mom. She complained bitterly to me that all he is going to do is count dollars. Which in a Bengali culture, you want to be poor and educated. I remember just saying, you should be happy if he's happy sweeping the streets of San Francisco. I didn't make an intellectual argument. I wasn't that smart. He joined the banking side at Robertson Stevens and hated it. In the last 6 months, a couple of friends from Robertson showed up, and Arnab pointed them out to me and said, these guys helped save my job. They made sure I didn't get fired. He moved to the equities research side, where Dan Niles became his boss. In a way, Dan took Arnab under his wing, and it was the beginning of Arnab's professional success. We are fortunate that Dan is here with us today to share his memories of Arnab. Dan.
Well, I was lucky enough to hire Arnab in 1996. Even luckier that he became a friend. As I'm sure you all know, Arnab was special. He was brilliant. He had a double major in chemistry and physics from Stanford. But more importantly, he knew how to think and really see things in the world. Arnab worked for me at Robertson Stevens in the research department. And after just 2 years, I let him have his own set of companies to cover. I gave him all the optical and communications and graphics companies, including a small company called NVIDIA at the time. For those of you who know this area, you know it's complicated. Arnab was young, and he looked young. A couple of CEOs were really nervous when they first met him. But I told them Arnab was the guy they wanted, because he was a lot smarter than I was on their products and technology, and it was true. After talking to Arnab, they never questioned that he was the best man for the job. I have so many memories of Arnab. We worked crazy hours together. He used to call my office the troll hole because it was this inner cubicle with no windows. But it helped us focus. And we lived at the office sometimes. And I remember one time we were working on a project for so long that I blearily looked over, and Arnab was laid out, and he's not very tall, as you know, and he was laid out on this metal filing cabinet, curled up, taking a power nap for 15 minutes. And then, next thing I know, he was up and at it again. He never quit. He always came through. He always had my back. There aren't many people in the world you can say that about, but Arnab was one of them. But what made Arnab special was not how smart he was or how hard he worked. What made him very special was how good you felt when you were around him. No matter how tough the circumstances, even the depths of hell, Arnab could find the fun. He remembered everything and was a fantastic storyteller. He had the goods on all of us, and he knew how to make us laugh. He remembered stories I honestly had forgotten about us. So I guess I shouldn't have been too surprised when he picked up, moved to Los Angeles, and started doing stand-up comedy, of all things. For those of you who haven't seen the YouTube video of one of his routines, you should go on and look at it. It's so Arnab. It's the only thing I can say. And he spent a lot of time in those videos talking about his love life, which seemed appropriate given at one point he was dating a 6-foot-tall Russian model. When I teasingly asked Arnab if she was worth the climb, he got that great smile of his and assured me that she was. Life was looking up for him, he said. Catching up with Arnab was always fun, and I missed that already. When I left Robertson to go to Lehman Brothers, Robertson offered Arnab my position to head the semiconductor practice with a big boost in pay. They knew his value and they fought to keep him. I was lucky, though, and quite honestly touched that Arnab decided to come with me to Lehman and continue to be my right-hand man. We had 4 more wonderful years together professionally. In total, we worked for 8 years together. I loved having him with me through all of it. I couldn't have asked for a better person to be in the trenches with. So when Jensen, who recently was named Business Person of the Year by Fortune magazine, for those of you who don't know NVIDIA, needed a new investor relations head, I immediately contacted Jensen with Arnab's name. Arnab was truly an amazing person to have in my life. And for those of you who know Mr. and Mrs. Chanda, it is easy to see where Arnab got his intelligence, his wit, and his values from. Mr. and Mrs. Chanda, I thank you for my wonderful friend and co-worker. You raised an incredible man, and his legacy as a person is an honor to you. I would like to close with the words of the poet Robert Southey. The loss of a friend is like that of a limb. Time may heal the anguish of the wound, but the loss cannot be repaired. We miss you, Arnab.
With Lehman Brothers, it was the move to LA. It marked the real fun part of Arnab's life. Even in the past 6 months, whenever he thought of a getaway, it was the city of angels that he wanted to escape to. He even said, if I get cured, I'm going to move to LA, and then stopped and realized that I had just moved from Minnesota to San Jose. And he was like, well, you have to move as well. But the city of angels was where Arnab, the partying Arnab, the flashy Arnab, came to life. He had his Hollywood pad. There are some kids in the audience, so I won't say what went on in that Hollywood pad. But I merely witnessed it from afar, visiting occasionally. It was Matt Cornu and David Hockman and Todd Koren, Todd isn't here today, who lived that life with Arnab. Matt has very kindly decided to capture that time in Arnab's life for us. Come up here, Matt.
Thank you all for being here. My name is Matt, and quite simply said, Arnab was my great friend. Now, I will be sweet and brief up here, which would be in huge contrast to our friend Arnab. Virtually any topic or any situation, Arnab had some specific views, and he was going to share them. Often, it was just one long, uninterrupted monologue. We would go to parties when he was living in Los Angeles, and the next morning I would get text messages from all sorts of people. Who is that Arnab guy? Oh my God, is he for real? Yes, Arnab was for real. And yes, he was the original court jester. There's also the time when he called me one night and my phone quickly lost power. And I connected with him the next day, and he admitted that he had gone on talking for 25 minutes before realizing I wasn't on the other end of the line. I'm sure many of you can remember these funny one-sided conversations. So most of you know, Arnab was an eager supporter of Barack Obama. Stickers, t-shirts, fundraisers, the works. In fact, Arnab was such a fan of Barack Obama that in 2008, he traveled to the swing state of Nevada to walk the precincts, knock on doors, and rally voters for the cause. And after Obama won the election, Arnab said it was the best day of his life. Of course, Barack Obama wrote The Audacity of Hope. And I want to talk about the audacity of Arnab Chanda. Arnab had no shortage of audacity. I guess you'd call some of his clothes fashion forward, right? The red shirts, the ruffled shirts, the flowered shirts, the pointed Prada shoes. The more ridiculous and attention-grabbing, the better from his perspective. And then just the nonstop jokes and storytelling. He had gained quite a reputation in the LA party market. This fearlessness, this willingness to speak his mind and not care about what other people thought of him is what made him such a magnetic character. In thinking about Arnab, I would actually describe him as being what I'd call a 200% person. On the one hand, he was 100% Bengali, through and through. That was never something that was going to leave him. And he had such a love for the home country. And yet, he was equally 100% American. Some people, if they moved to a big, new, foreign country like Arnab did, would choose to seek out the familiarity of their home culture. Not Arnab. Arnab was audacious. He just threw himself into American life, trying to understand it, and at the same time, thoroughly enjoying himself, as you can see. Although he never specifically told me that it was his goal to live the American dream, I think that's what he was aiming for. I can say with certainty, Arnab, you lived the American dream, and I know you would have loved to hear me say that. It was a dream that was far, far too short, but it was your American dream. Several of us were with him in Los Angeles at the downtown convention center on the day he became a US citizen. He took the oath and was surrounded by hundreds of new Americans. And at the time, he also said that that was one of the best days of his life. And I think you're all seeing this recurring theme here. Arnab had many of these best days of his life. He also had quite a few nicknames. For instance, there was Knob, Knobber, Chandi, Doorknob, Chandalicious, and my personal favorite, Operator. The inside jokes with his friends were always terrific, but let's not forget about the outside jokes. Arnab was so audacious that he performed stand-up routines at real comedy clubs with joy and ease. Like the proper student he was, he took a handful of classes, comedy classes, in Santa Monica, and then just got up on stage. In front of a packed room at the world-famous Comedy Store on Sunset Boulevard, Arnab got up and proceeded to lay down his lines, and the entire room burst into laughter. That's how I choose to remember him. And since I'm primarily speaking about Arnab's time in Los Angeles, I must mention one of his activities that touched so many young people. There is an organization named Minds Matters, which helps mentor high school students and prepares them for college. Arnab volunteered for Minds Matters as an SAT math tutor, and this required a real dedication of every Saturday of the year teaching these students. Can you just imagine Arnab? A nice blend of the fun-loving teacher Arnab and then the strict professor Arnab. From what I've heard from the founders of the organization, Arnab made a real difference in these kids' lives. And again, Arnab spoke about how these tutoring sessions were some of the best days of his life. Now, Arnab had a limited number of shortcomings too, let's be honest. Cooking, no thank you. Planning, not so much. Arnab would be the first to tell you that he wasn't really good at the details. Hey man, I'm not like a detail-oriented guy, okay? I think that's because his mind was always swirling in the big ideas. Big ideas in physics, big ideas in finance. He couldn't be bothered with pesky little details. You know, pesky little details like paying your taxes. The story goes that when Arnab lived in the Hollywood Hills, there was a knock on the door, and he went to answer the door, and it was a federal IRS agent wearing a uniform. Are you Arnab Chanda? Yes, sir, yes, I'm Arnab. Mr. Chanda, you failed to pay your taxes last year. They were now 11 months due. Oh, right, yeah, that's probably something I should take care of, okay. Just the minor details. Bibi, Partho, Anu, I'm going to miss creating new stories with your Arnab. But I promise to keep telling the old stories and smiling. And so, Arnab, Nob, Nobber, Chanda, we all choose to remember your brightest days. We all choose to remember those best days of your life.
Arnab got married in late 2012, and while he decided to end the relationship earlier this year, he never actually regretted the wedding. Simply put, the wedding was just too much fun, and he would often remark that neither of his Stanford friends would have visited the place of his birth without that milestone. And to take a point from Matt's presentation, when Arnab decided surreptitiously to begin the divorce, he created a folder on Google Drive called Operation. In this picture here, you have David, Dan, and Girish at his wedding with Rajashree's mom and Shubhankar Sengupta at the back from St. James High School. The cancer diagnosis happened 2 years after the wedding. As always, it was friends to the rescue. Senior in this picture is Dr. Progyan Dash and Rakhi Bhattacharya, both good friends of Arnab's. It was to Houston and Dr. Progandash's home that we rushed, and he steered us through the surgery. And then it was another friend, my husband, Shalin, who met Arnab in 1994, who decided that, per his request, we must move to San Jose. But the real friend and the brightest star in Arnab's life for the next 2 years is not one person, it is a company, and it's NVIDIA. It was the silver lining in the dreadful dark cloud in those times. Arnab joined NVIDIA only 4 months before the stage 4 cancer diagnosis came along. And there at NVIDIA, he encountered 2 bosses, Colette Kress, she's here today, as well as Jensen Huang, who's also here today. Arnab always described Jensen as a genius. I have never heard my brother use that characterization to describe anyone. I am delighted that Jensen has managed to carve time out of his busy schedule to be here and say a few words in Arnab's memory. Come on here, Jensen.
I know I was supposed to wear color today, but Arnab really liked this outfit. And he used to tell me how much he loved this outfit, and then one day I told him it's the only outfit I had. And you might have noticed that towards the end of his life, he was wearing a lot of black jackets, and so I thought I would wear this on his behalf. And it also happens to be the only outfit I have. The stories I heard today were so Arnab. The stories were so Arnab. And frankly, if I had known those stories earlier, I would have hired him years ago. But as you all know, Arnab's a little strange. Special, but strange. And I met Arnab in 1999. Dan was relating to that. NVIDIA had just gone public, so it was a very special time in our company's history. And I was still quite young. And Arnab had just joined Robertson Stevens as an analyst. And we were one of the companies that he would cover. And he was, as you mentioned, quite young. But a young Arnab is not quite a man yet, as you know. He looked just like a child. And we had financial analysts covering us, and they looked like professionals. And then there was Arnab, and his super pointy toes shoes. There was something about his inappropriate dress for a financial analyst that I could never understand. But he tracked us. He followed us for obviously many years, since 1999. But he didn't just follow us. He followed us. Everywhere I was traveling in any financial circles, if I looked, there he was. He didn't just follow us, he was following us. And he just loved the company so much. And as you know, although he might have not have thought many were geniuses, but he always thought he was. You guys know that in his mind, he is literally the smartest person in the world. And I thought I wrote something down. I thought I would read it to you. And I think the internet is, particularly LinkedIn, has a real way of allowing us to describe who we believe we are. Who we believe we are. And I'm just so pleased that we are his last entry. In his LinkedIn, he writes, Vice President, Finance at NVIDIA. I thought that was Colette. He goes on. He's an expert on technology, investing, corporate and business strategy, with interest in AI, VR, autonomous cars, robotics, semiconductors, and machine learning. I thought that was me. But that's who he thought he was. And it just made me smile. And I'm just so glad that that was his last entry. We met in 1999, and there were I would say when I reflected, of course, all of you knew him his whole life, and I knew him since 1999 on a regular basis, and on a much more intimate and close basis for the last couple of years. And he was always telling me how smart he was. And the first thing he said was, did you know that I was a stand-up comic? And of course, he knew that one of my great gifts is a stand-up comic. And so he wanted to make sure that I was only doing it as a hobby, but he was doing it professionally. And so he said, I'm on YouTube. I said, you are? He said, yeah, I was in LA, Comedy Store. I was a stand-up comic. I did it for real. And people came, they laughed, and I'm on YouTube. And I said, really? And so we pulled it up. We're at dinner. I think Colette, you might have been there with us. I think it was one of our road trips. And we pulled up his YouTube. And then I just realized he could have been such a great comic. He had so much going for him. He was short, ethnic, a little strange, and super smart, courageous, really talked about dating as if he knew something about it. And he projected just an enormous amount of confidence. He had so much going for him. He could have been such a great comic if he could have told a joke. He would have been incredible. And so he, as you know, he has followers. There are 3 followers. I'm one of them. So I don't know who the other 2 are. You're probably here. Mama, Papa, maybe the 2 of you. There were some jokes about Papa Chanda. And did he swear like that? So that was the first thing he wanted to tell me, was how great of a comedian he was. The second thing, of course, he wanted to tell me was he always told me how incredibly knowledgeable he was about the tech industry, and in fact he was. He's an encyclopedia of modern semiconductor industry. He knew every company, he knew every CEO, he knew everybody's products. He knew how everybody did. He knew how everybody did back then. He knew how everybody did last quarter. And he has an opinion about how everybody's going to do tomorrow. And in fact, I still remember this. In 2010, he was on TV, CNBC. And you might be able to find it. I think it's still on the internet somewhere. But our Arnab went out on the limb and put a buy rating on NVIDIA. 2010. And I got to read this. In 2010, he put a buy rating on NVIDIA with a price target. This is 2010. 2010. Think of this, okay? I want you to go back there. 2010. Arnab puts a buy rating on NVIDIA with a price target. I mean, just, good thing you're sitting down, $20. He went way out on the limb. $20 price target. And he said this, he said NVIDIA R&D has gone up 70% because the firm was investing in transition from a graphics chip to a computing product line. So these products are just starting to go into production now, and the R&D is going to pay off now. 5 years later, NVIDIA stock hit $20. So he was 5 years early in his call, but he was right. And the thing that I always loved about him was when he asks you a question, you give him an answer. Do you know the face that he makes? So when we first met in 1999, he asked me, so hey, Jensen, look, there are a lot of graphics companies, and they come and go. They come and go, right, Dan? You know that. There were hundreds of graphics companies, and they come and go. What makes NVIDIA special? How are you going to be able to hold on to your lead? And so I would tell him, I would say, look, NVIDIA was engineered to be able to sustain our progress, architected to be agile, and we have multiple teams working at the same time, organized in such a way that we can hit every single year with a better product. And so we should be able to sustain ourselves. And he goes like this. You know the look. He goes like this. He's got that big lower lip, and he goes. Several years later, he asked me, Jensen, look, this was about 2010 timeframe, and we were going into parallel computing. This was in fact the buy rating that he just mentioned, and we were expanding our processor architecture to be able to perform and accelerate other types of applications beyond computer graphics. And so I explained to him. He says, what makes NVIDIA special? I mean, Intel is going to have all of these parallel processors, and they have multi-cores, and they're really the giant company. And you guys, you're trading at about $12 right now. And what makes you so special? And I said, hey, look, this isn't about parallel computing. This is about accelerated computing, and architecture and software and domain understanding makes a big difference. And then so he goes. And I never could tell whether that bottom pouty lip meant I didn't understand and now I get it, or that's so full of crap and I don't believe a word you're saying. And so and that bottom lip, I mean, it just comes out every day, every time we're talking. And so finally, a couple of years ago, several years ago actually, he approached me. He said, Jensen, look, I know more about the technology industry than anybody, and I've been an analyst for a long time, and I think that in the future, the great opportunity for me and where I will realize my full potential is not in the financial industry, but inside a company. And I want it to be yours. I want to join your company. And this was before he went to Omnivision. And he would hound me about that. And he was so persistent. He would come and all I remembered was Mr. Pointy Prototos wants to leave financial industry and would like to be the first financial industry analyst to be an investor relations person. And I never thought that I would never thought that it would be a good move. And he would tell me that he thinks it makes perfect sense because he understood the banks and he understood investors and he understood how to analyze companies and what they're looking for and how to position a particular company so that investors would feel more comfortable with it and be excited by it. And so he would explain that to me, and he would persistently explain that to me, but I wasn't convinced. And it took him 2 years of just persistently nagging me about it until one day he convinced me, and he came to work at NVIDIA. And before he did that, he asked me, "So Jensen, how big are we going to be?" I said, "We could be 100 times bigger. No technology company has ever been organized this way, has ever been created this way. Our computing platform will accelerate applications post Moore's Law in all these different fields. And in fact, not only that, we have vertical markets that we're creating products for. We could be 100 times bigger." And he goes, and he joins NVIDIA. And the truth is, as I was sitting here watching and here listening to all of the great comments you guys were all making, it really, in a lot of ways, my disappointment is not having invited him to come to NVIDIA 2 years earlier than that. It is the case that Arnab, this young man, is truly gifted. He is really quite special, and he is incredibly interesting. We've had the benefit of traveling together in financial roadshows, and there's not one city he doesn't know everything about. There's not one investor he doesn't know everything about. There's not one industry or one gossip or one political trend, one new startup that he doesn't know everything about. Whether he knew anything about it at all, or that he just tells the story so incredibly well you can't tell the difference, I just don't think it matters. He's just that gifted. He is truly, truly one of the world's interesting people. The one thing that I will say also about his life, we might have the feeling that Arnab passed surely too soon. Surely too soon. And we might also even think that he passed at a time when he was full of potential to do something great, the potential to have found joy in his work and joy in his life in such an enormous way. But I will tell you that he fulfilled all that potential. He saw all of his potential come true, and he was able to enjoy great friendship and great love from the people that he worked with, and he found great joy. And that's not potential. That was completely real. And the last 2 years of his life, I know that the parts that I was fortunate to have enjoyed, that he was truly happy. He was surrounded by people he admired. He was surrounded by people that he loved working with. He was able to tell a story about a company that he's known his entire career. And he was able to tell it not just because he was told what to say. He was able to tell the story about a company that he knew from its birth, from the day of its IPO. And he was able to tell our story in a real genuine way. And he truly deeply understood and appreciated the strategy of the company and have helped to shape it. And I want you to know that we all loved him and the work that he did and the contributions he made is shaping our company for generations to come. Papa Shanda, Mama Shanda, Bibi, all the friends, I'm so sorry for your loss. We lost him way too early, but we can all be happy that he was able to see his dreams come true and he found real joy.
Fortune's profile of Jensen a few weeks ago described him as a visionary, of course. What they didn't mention was his heart and the company culture that he has built. Jensen and Colette have been unflinching in Arnab's support through his illness. So many of Arnab's NVIDIA colleagues have visited him at home these past few months. Bob, Shaheen, Danny, Matt, and many more, whose names I don't recall. To borrow a friend's description, NVIDIA is a class act. Arnab loved his friends as much, if not more, than his family. Every person in this photo is here in the room today. These photos show friends that lit up his life in sickness and in health. This is Chetan with Arnab. In his Twin Peaks home in San Francisco, Chetan has the unfortunate experience of being Arnab's roommate and waking up early in the morning, going to the bathroom to brush and realizing that his toothbrush is wet. And Arnab has already used it up while his own toothbrush is sitting right next to him. Here's Lori with Arnab. Lori was on the sales side in Lehman. Arnab would always tell me that salespeople never really liked him because he never returned their calls. Lori must have been an exception. Here's Amy. Here's Todd, Corinne, Matt Cornu, David Hockman, Rajarshi at Arnab's last birthday on October 1998. Here's Colette with her family with us on the same day. And then there's JJ. This is a wonderful picture of JJ and Arnab together. Arnab shared so many stories of JJ's escapades. I won't embarrass him today, but he had a special place in his heart for JJ. As I wind down the story of Arnab's life, I must take a moment to acknowledge what he means to my parents and what they meant to him. Actually, I have to step back. I have to thank Bappada here, Arnab and my Bappada. He's here from Boston today with his wife. He took that original photo of Arnab and me, and here we are on his shoulder. Ma and I call Bappada virtually every other day when we had to manage Arnab's symptoms. I don't know what we would have done if he was not on WhatsApp and on the call all the time. I don't have a picture of Dr. Srinivas, but she's right here. Dr. Srinivas was just a phone call away. She texted back at the speed of light. Arnab felt great peace and confidence every time we went to Stanford. He wouldn't want to go to the hospital side too much, but he felt deeply at peace in communicating with Dr. Srinivas. And now to my parents. Arnab's intelligence and intellect came from Ma. She and Arnab were kindred spirits, pushing each other to excel. My mom was instrumental in Arnab's humility. Early on in his life, Arnab was not shy about flaunting his ego, and I think some of us got the full force of his personality, but he realized that it's good to tone it down. In turn, Arnab would feed Ma's intellectual curiosity by sharing the news of the world. Arnab would always joke that I was made with the genetic leftovers after he was created. He was dead right. Arnab was and will always be my mother's special child. Ma wanted to share a few words through the poem of Rabindranath Tagore, a famous Indian poet and musician. Shokol priyer majkhane je priyo, periye moron shemor songe jabe, kebol roshe, kebol shure, kebol onubhabe. Arnab felt that sandwiched between two domineering women in his wife and daughter, Baba needed special protection. Even as recently as October, he scolded me when I grew impatient with Baba. Arnab felt that the cancer diagnosis had hit my father harder than anyone else. Baba had lost his elder brother as well as his father, who were both in their 40s when they passed. But Arnab fervently hoped that he would be strong enough to bear this burden should the dreaded day come. And once again, my father, like my mother, will take refuge in the words of Rabindranath Tagore to help soothe the blow. Today, Baba will sing a portion of a song. It happened to be one of Arnab's favorites.
যখন পড়বে না মোর পায়ের চিহ্ন এই বাটে আমি বাইব না মোর খেয়া তরি এই ঘাটে গো যখন পড়বে না মোর পায়ের চিহ্ন এই বাটে চুকিয়ে দেব বেচা কেনা মিটিয়ে দেব গো মিটিয়ে দেব লেনা দেনা বন্ধ হবে আনা গোনা এই হাটে তখন আমায় নাইবা মনে রাখলে তারার পানে চেয়েছে নাইবা আমায় ডাকলে যখন পড়বে না মোর পায়ের চিহ্ন এই বাটে তখন কে বলে গো সেই প্রভাতে নেই আমি সকল খেলায় করব খেলায় এই আমি আহা কে বলে গো সেই প্রভাতে নেই আমি নতুন নামে ডাকবে মোরে ডাকবে বাঁধবে নতুন বাহু ডোরে আসবো যাব চিরদিনের সেই আমি তখন আমায় নাইবা মনে রাখলে তারার পানে চেয়েছে নাইবা আমায় ডাকলে যখন পড়বে না মোর পায়ের চিহ্ন এই বাটে আমি বাইব না মোর খেয়া তরি এই ঘাটে গো যখন পড়বে না মোর পায়ের চিহ্ন এই বাটে থ্যাংক ইউ
Wow, sorry I was a little late to coming. I had to make sure my son didn't miss his Russian School of Mathematics lesson today. This was, after all, an idea from Arnab's, and in his spirit, I am sure he would not have looked kindly upon that. So forgive me for that. So I've known Arnab for a while, and when he would introduce me, what he would say is, this is my good friend Shalin. He happens to be married to my sister. Right now you could just say, why not say he's my brother-in-law? But that just wouldn't be fair. And it wouldn't be fair because that is not how a relationship started. Right? And if you know one thing about Arnab, he is fiercely loyal, okay, and protective of his friends, right, at all costs at times. In fact, just a few days before he passed, he told his sister, don't be too overbearing, otherwise you'll drive away your husband and your children. Now, how can you not love a guy like that? So, Arnab was a special person, and I think we all know that. And these last few months, it's been a journey for many of us. And for me personally, some words of Emily Dickinson kept kind of echoing through my mind, and I'd like to share those with you. Okay. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. Those words echoed in my mind a lot. And as I thought about them, especially that last word, I came to realize that we collectively are the custodians of Arnab's immortality. It is left to us. Right? And I can see that from the well wishes, the conversations, the stories, the experiences. That's what is here. And not to mention, it's just not all of us here today in the room, it's also the wonderful correspondence that we've received from those who couldn't be here. Right? Collectively, it is a responsibility that we uphold, and I think many would love to be on that journey going forward because we want to continue to remember him. In holding that spirit, I want to tell you about something that I think many of you already know, right? Which is we are establishing, in partnership with NVIDIA, the Arnab K. Chondo NVIDIA Scholarship in Physics. Now, I use that word partnership, but partnership implies that there's equal effort on both sides, and that is not the case here. It is through the immense effort of NVIDIA and especially Laura Clemenson, Bob Sherban, and I have no doubt that Jensen and Colette are doing a lot behind the scenes, as well as the overall NVIDIA family that made this happen. Right, so thank you. It means a tremendous amount to so many of us.
Okay, there's the contact information. If you need to, I think you've already emailed a bunch of people already, right? So I'll leave that up there for a bit. But I think in the end, you know, for me, I always remember him as that person who was in many ways not afraid to voice his opinion, not afraid to stand up for his friends, to what he believed was right. He never really thought about consequences, and I think that's part of his charm. And that's what I'm really going to miss about him, is I always learned something from him when we talked, and I'm going to miss that voice. Sometimes I didn't actually like what he had to say, you know? But that was part of it. I'm sure there were times he didn't like what I had to say, but it didn't matter, right? The egos were out the door, and I'm sure we both had them, but they were out the door, and we were interested in learning, and ultimately, that's what Arnab, you know, was meant to be on this earth, was, you know, in some ways, you know, a voice of reason, of rationality, of different perspectives, and someone who really meant a lot to me, who I know is not going to be there. But as I mentioned, it falls to all of us, and I know he would be happy if, through our association with him, we collectively became closer to each other. Thank you so much for being here. It means a lot.
I just wanted to thank Bechtel for allowing us to do this here. When we got the news that Arnab didn't have too much time left, he told me he wanted a memorial at Stanford. And I asked him, I know it's not Memorial Church that you wanted. Where does it have to be? He didn't have to think at all, Bechtel. And so I wanted to thank Shalini Bhutani, who runs Bechtel. I wanted to thank all of you for coming here today. I think the pain of his passing is going to be there, but I know it's a pain that is jointly shared by all of us in this room. Thank you again. And I was wondering, we were going to open the mic for about 15 minutes or so. If anyone wanted to say a few words, you are more than welcome to come up.
Arnab, or Naber, as he was well known to us, was a guiding light to me personally. He was the first guy I met on the very steps of Bechtel, September 9th, 1994. I remember the day as clear as my hand. He was like an older brother here at Stanford. He was a guiding light for me for my first job at Robbie Stevens. In fact, I'd never heard of Robbie Stevens until I'd known Arnab was working there. Even after college, he was my first roommate, as you saw in the photo. The story about the toothbrush is absolutely true. I will not share any other incriminating photos from that from the time when we lived together, which was a great time. We, on a very positive note, we threw a very successful party, which I think was our mutual first party and perhaps a launch to his LA escapades. I'll make this short because there's a lot of memories I have of Arnab, and it's hard to share that. But you know, he was the kind of guy who, probably the only guy, my only older brother, who would call and say, "Hey man, what's going on?" And I loved hearing that because it was the most sincere, "Hey man, what's going on?" And then you knew you couldn't just have a 10-minute conversation with the Naber. You had to set up some time apart, you know, get all your chores done. And I think we had a good partnership going because he loved to talk and I loved to listen. And so it was with that memory of Naber that, you know, I'm just saddened that I will never hear his voice again to ask me, "Hey man, what's going on?" And he would truly, sincerely want to understand everything about what's going on in my life. He gave me great advice. I sometimes listened, mostly ignored. No, mostly I listened, and he was a great older brother figure to me, and he will be sadly missed for both me and my family. You know, my wife couldn't make it today, but just as another, someone mentioned the story about Arnab being a mother-in-law. I think that was for you, David. But that was absolutely true. He always gave me relationship advice. But when I found my wife, who's my wife now, he was all in for her and he said, "Hey man, go for it." And so here we are. So we're both, me and my family are going to miss him a lot. And again, the memories will live on forever, and the stories will live on forever.
So my name is Arjun. I've known Arnab since 1990. We did school together in Calcutta. It was funny. I wasn't going to say anything. I just wanted to listen. But a lot of these stories kind of resonated with me. The Arnab that I knew, since the 90s. So I come from a school that was a very strict all-boys school, and Arnab joined that when we were in the 11th grade, which is I think high school here. So in our school, when you get into high school, we invite people from outside schools to come and join. And that's when a lot of smart people come in, weird people come in, strange people come in, all kinds of funky people come in, and we're always trying to assess the different kind of folks. And I still remember there were these two clear categories of people who would join our school. One were the super genius, the obvious prodigal sons. You would see them and you would understand that they are intensely intelligent. And then there would be these pseudo-intellectuals, who'd come in with, at that point of time, we had these books called Resnick Halliday or something, and Iridov. Smart people know about it. I wasn't one of them, but they would walk around with these kinds of books. But when Arnab joined, and I was his batchmate at that point of time, we created a new category called What the Heck? Because nobody understood what he was. And I remember the first time I met this guy was in 1990 or 91 in a school debate. And I think somebody was very kind, I think his earliest friend, who talked about him having a Travolta walk. It was actually Travolta, in between Travolta and actually a man jumping on a pogo stick. So that's how weird he would walk. And when I first met him, I said, who walks like that? And we had no idea what he's going to be all about. And then over time, I got to know him, and I realized that this guy doesn't just have one dimension about him. I mean, not only was he a genius, he was completely outspoken, he was funny, he was amusing, he was incredible. In school, when we used to go back home, there were people who would take public transport. Many of us used to do that. Some of us used to be car riders. We used to have cars going home. In India, mass population, everything else, a car meant that you'd have 15 to 16 people sitting in a car at any point of time. And Arnab would often latch on to us saying that, hey, you know what, drop me off. I want to take a bus from here or there. And those were some of the best moments we had after school, because like everybody else said, he had an opinion about everything. And no matter what we talked about, Arnab would always come out on top. He was so well read, whether it was talking about the importance of nationalism to build a nation, to the war or the differences of ideas between Hindus and Muslims, and how that partitioned and shaped India. He had an opinion on everything. And if you tried to argue with him, he would take you so far into details. You would walk off thinking you won, and then you just realize that he just slapped you hard in the face. He was that kind of a guy. But there was this one thing about him that, there were teachable moments now that I think back. He's such a goofy, funky guy. You never really think about teachable moments with Arnab because he just says so many things and say, yeah, all right, whatever. But when you think about it, I remember, there was somebody who mentioned that he stands by his friends. So in school, I was, a group of folks at that point of time, we were called prefects. We had some additional privileges. In school, we could kind of bully people and things like that to some degree and take care of the school. There was this one time, I still remember this, and I was, I was kind of drunk in my own position, and I chose to tease a male teacher because he had some kind of an issue with him. And in India in those times, it wasn't really admissible, but it was more common. I stood behind the teacher teasing him. And I was wrong, clearly. So the teacher wasn't a meek guy. I didn't know that. So the teacher turned around, grabbed my hand, and said, let's go to the principal's office. I was terrified because, for a prefect to get there and then be shot down, I didn't know what's going to happen. Are they going to demote me? Obviously, that would never happen, but, I was terrified. So I was there apologizing to everyone, and in comes Mr. Travolta, walking, what's going on? What's going on? Nobody invited him. He walked straight into the principal's office and is standing there listening to that discussion. And I was like, trembling and this and that. I apologized. I couldn't admit my fault because, I didn't want to at that point of time. Arnab had no idea what happened, right? But he stood by me. He went into an argument with the deputy principal at that point of time. extolling about the virtues of the Arjun that he knows, and he didn't know whether it was right or wrong, but I was so impressed that this guy knew in my school, defending me for something that I had done, but he had no idea and he didn't care about. But he fought his way through, and within 5 minutes, I was out of the principal's office with my head up high, in a situation where I should have been penalized. I was super impressed, and that was a teachable moment for me to know that Arnab is kind of a person who, once he gets to know you, he's not going to leave your side. His love to continue, his love to hope, it is unbelievable. When I first realized, when he first told me a few years ago that he was fighting cancer, he came and visited me in Washington, D.C. I stay in D.C. And he talked about how he plans to fight it and things like that. We talked about many, many things. I don't want to get into details right now. But he was so full of hope. And I said, Arnab, and I was trying to gently tell him, because in my close family, I've gone through this thrice before. I could see how people are, and it's kind of a sense. And I told him, hey, you know what, at one point of time, maybe you want to just take it easy and let nature take its course. And he said, no, man, what are you talking about? Have you heard of something called cryogenics? I can even look at cryogenics. And 5 years from now, if I continue through this, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to convert this into a chronic disease. And that is when I realized that he's a man so full of hope and passion that it is impossible to expect anything otherwise. And it's been such a wonderful experience knowing Arnab that I'm so proud to call him my friend. I will always remember him, and like my mother tells me often, that I wish I had a son like Arnab. And to his parents, that's testimony to how impressive he's been to so many people around the world. Thanks.